Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. So, first of all, apologies for the noise of the construction. There's construction going on somewhere above me in this apartment building. It sounds like it's right above me, but I've learned actually that it always sounds like it's right above you. And sometimes it can be two or three or I don't know how many floors up. But they're doing some sort of renovation in one of the apartments above me. If you've ever lived in Ho Chi Minh City, you know that this is just the way it is. The city is one giant construction zone. You are never guaranteed quiet from construction, pretty much no matter where you live in the city. They're always drilling something or pounding something, or if it's not the apartment right above you, it's the building right next to you. It's just the way it goes here. So, because I have made a commitment to review everything I read, in order to stay on top of that, I often don't have the luxury of waiting to film at the perfect time. I've got I've got two kids and three jobs, and I'm busy. So I've got some time now in the afternoon, and I'm just going to press on ahead, and hopefully the noise won't get too bad. And I also suspect maybe it's the kind of thing that sounds louder to me, but maybe the camera won't pick it up. But I don't know. Let me know how it sounds to you, and I'll consider that in the future when making videos, maybe. But anyways, Bring Up the Bodies. So this is the second book in the Thomas Cromwell trilogy by Hilary Mantel. The first book is Wolf Hall, which I've read last month and reviewed it on this blog. On this YouTube channel. I also have a blog. That was a slip of the tongue. The the review I gave of Wolf Hall was not very good, and that's the danger of doing these things unscripted, and sometimes, as in the case of that my review of Wolf Hall, maybe filming it late at night when I was tired. It strikes me that I spent a lot of that review giving unnecessary background historical information instead of maybe focusing on what makes these books unique, which is Hilary Mantel's prose style. And this, so in order to avoid making the same mistake, let me just talk about the prose style right up front here. What makes these books unique is that Hilary Mantel is writing historical fiction. And historical fiction is, I think, usually a genre where the people reading it are interested in just knowing the details of history. Like, what did the king do on this day? Who got their heads chopped off on this day? And, with a little bit of a storyteller's narration and flourish, but you're primarily interested in conveying events. And I've considered myself a fan of that type of historical fiction since I was a teenager. This book, though, or Hilary Mantel's trilogy, is a much more literary historical fiction. So these books have won all the prizes. Bring Up Bodies and Wolf Hall, as Steve Donoghue said in his videos, just swept all the available prizes. All the critics loved it, and it's very much books that are popular with the literati, the type of people who like very beautifully written prose. Now, my own limitations is that I like to read. I like stories, but maybe like a lot of people here on BookTube, I'm attracted to the stories because maybe more of the drama and the narrative, and less so because of the beautiful writing and the beautiful description. I think there are different types of readers out there. So for anybody who is similar to me, you will find these books a little bit of an obstacle. Now, I don't want to say that it's a struggle, really, because that may be overstating it. They're more or less comprehensible. And in fact, Bring Up the Bodies I found to be an easier read than Wolf Hall. And initially I was thinking, okay, maybe I've just gotten used to it. Maybe it's just me. But then I was watching Steve Donoghue's commentary on this book. Oh, and by the way, as I was reading this book, I watched Steve Donoghue's videos on it. He did this book as his Steve Tiberius Donoghue book club earlier this year. So I missed out on that, but I've caught up on the videos now. And I'll link to them all down below. If you've watched Steve Donoghue, you know he's very entertaining to listen to. Much more entertaining than I am. So, I don't know what you're doing watching this video. Just click on the link in the description down below and go watch Steve's videos, really. But yeah, as Steve said in his video, that because this was the second book in the trilogy, and Hilary Mantel had kind of put forth all of her creativity or creative efforts in the first book, she allowed herself to be a little bit more relaxed in the prose style of this book. I'm paraphrasing what Steve says, but I think the general gist of it was she's striving to impress a little bit less. And consequently, it's a little bit more normal to read. Wolf Hall, although the book on the whole was no problem to follow, there were paragraphs, there were maybe pages where I struggled to decipher what was going on. I don't think I had that problem anywhere in Bring Up the Bodies. The prose was very clear. But what we do get, which is the same as Wolf Hall, is we get a lot of description. We get a lot of passages where it's just describing what Thomas Cromwell is thinking. We get a lot of domestic scenes about Thomas Cromwell's family and his household, which are removed from the main historical drama. Not quite as much as Wolf Hall. There was more in Wolf Hall, but we do get that. And so that is maybe what you want to emphasize when you're talking about this book. Because if you just talk about the Tudor drama and Anne Boleyn getting her head cut off, well, that's been done 100 times before in a lot of different other historical fiction. So I wanted to make sure I started my review by emphasizing that. Okay, that being out of the way, this is the book where Anne Boleyn gets her head cut off. So I think at least in the English-speaking world, this is very commonly known, right? I kind of feel like I shouldn't even retell it because everybody knows it, but the internet is a big place, and sometimes I get viewers from different countries or whatever. So very briefly then, Anne Boleyn, after getting married to Henry VIII, when Henry VIII got tired of her, he had her executed, had her head chopped off, which, is one of those things. If you grow up in an English-speaking country, you hear the story about Henry VIII chopping off his wives' heads since you were little, and you kind of don't really pause to think about how strange that is, but it's really strange when you think about it. Anne Boleyn was the first Queen of England, reigning Queen of England, who ever got her head chopped off. That was not commonly the way it was done. Commonly, if the king wished to get rid of his wife, she was just put in a convent somewhere, put away somewhere quietly. And Anne Boleyn would have been the only Queen of England to get her head chopped off, except Henry VIII actually did it twice. I guess once you've already demonstrated you have a proclivity towards these things, then maybe the second time is not so surprising. So two of Henry VIII's wives got their heads chopped off, and the only reigning queens of England ever for this to happen. So that's bizarre. But because Anne Boleyn was tried for adultery, there had to be other people who were tried for adultery with her, right? It takes two to tangle. Or in this case, it takes five, because there were five men brought into the docket, found guilty, and executed. So it's if you're looking for salacious, juicy, macabre historical drama, it's all in here. And I mean, let's face it, there's I don't know if this is a good part of human nature, but there is a part of human nature that is just fascinated by these macabre, tragic episodes in history. And it's got all the stuff of the Greek drama. Anne Boleyn rising to such great heights, and then falling again. I mean, you could imagine a Greek dramatist just having a field day with this, because it even appears that the same characteristics that brought her into that position were the characteristics that brought about her downfall, her being kind of calculating and proud. And well, anyways, I've seen this done before in the Showtime cable series, The Tudors, which I at one point had a DVD set of in Cambodia and worked my way through from beginning to end. That was 10 years ago, so I only vaguely remembered it. And in fact, as I was reading this book and looking stuff up on the internet to double check it, I began to realize actually how much of that show I forgot. I remembered that Anne Boleyn got her head cut off. I mean, I already knew that. I remembered that her brother got executed in the same sweep. She was accused of incest with her brother. And I remembered that there were like a bunch of other people, but I didn't remember any of the specifics of those other people. So reading this book, I was reminded of who they were, going onto Wikipedia to look up their biographies, etc. Now, I guess the first thing that needs to be said, or the second thing, or however many things we're up to, the next thing I need to talk about is just to reiterate what I said earlier, that despite the fact that this is kind of where all the juicy drama comes in, this is a book that makes you wait for it. So there are a number of tragedies that happen like at the very end of this book, but it's slow paced. It's a book where the bulk of it again is talking about personal feelings, the thought processes of the characters, their philosophies on England, etc. So be ready for that. I guess the next thing to talk about maybe is Hilary Mantel's version of history. Again, I'm influenced by this after having watched Steve Donoghue's videos and listened to Steve Donoghue talk about the historical Cromwell versus the Cromwell in Hilary Mantel's book. But I mean, even without Steve's videos, I was kind of getting this impression from Wikipedia already. Based on the Wikipedia entries, it seems pretty clear that the men accused of adultery with Anne Boleyn were innocent. And they were tortured by Cromwell in one case, in the case of Mark Smeaton. There's, we don't have any historical record of this, but there were rumors of the time, and Wikipedia gives a strong impression that it was probably pretty definitely tortured. Steve Donoghue says the same thing. Now, Mark Smeaton was the only one who wasn't a gentleman. He was just the musician, so like a commoner. So Cromwell could torture him or have him tortured by somebody, either way. The other guys were all aristocrats, nobles, gentlemen. So they couldn't be tortured, but they could be railroaded. So brought up on false charges, convicted by what's the word I want to use here? A tampered jury, a carefully selected jury. and then executed. And you definitely get the impression, reading Wikipedia, if nothing else, that Thomas Cromwell is the bad guy here, and there's 5 innocent people and 1 innocent woman got their heads cut off. Now, the version that Hilary Mantel gives, because she is portraying Cromwell as the hero here, is, well, something's going on. Now, there appear to be 2 different things going on, and I'm not entirely sure how to reconcile the 2 of them, and maybe those of you watching this video could help me if you've read this book and have opinions on it. But one thing that is going on is Thomas Cromwell has a revenge plot. So it turns out that the 4 people who get framed for adultery with Anne Boleyn were also the 4 people who took part in a play mocking the dead Cardinal Wolsey in Book 1 in Wolf Hall. Wolsey is portrayed as Thomas Cromwell's mentor and father figure. So this is Thomas Cromwell's revenge scheme for the people who humiliated his beloved Cardinal Wolsey back in the first book of this series, Wolf Hall. The other thing that's going on, though, is in this version of history, it appears that these charges are not entirely made up out of thin air, as they probably were in real history. That Thomas Cromwell gets a number of people to confess or to inform on him that these 4 men were actually involved in questionable activities with Anne Boleyn. Now, there's a little bit of room left for ambiguity right up until the end of it, because adultery, by its very nature, happens behind closed doors. I think that's more or less a quote from this book. Somebody says, there are never any witnesses to adultery, third-party witnesses, by its very nature. So you just have to go off of circumstantial evidence. But there are reports to Cromwell from Anne Boleyn's lady-in-waiting, from Mark Smeaton, who in this book is portrayed as freely confessing too much for his own good. It looks like they're actually in the context of this book, it's not something Thomas Cromwell made up out of thin air. It appears that there may actually be some weight to these charges, which, to my mind, and here's the problem I have with interpreting what's going on in this book. Which is it? Is this Thomas Cromwell's revenge plot that he's carefully orchestrated over these 2 books? Or is this an actual case of adultery with Anne Boleyn? Because it can't be both, right? Or if it is both, that's a real case of incredible coincidence. Like the 4 men that Thomas Cromwell wants to get revenge on anyways, because all 4 of them just coincidentally happen to be players in a drama making fun of Cardinal Wolsey. All 4 of them are also the people that are having adultery with Anne Boleyn, and he just, the way it's portrayed in this book, he just kind of gets the evidence dumped on his lap in some cases. Anne Boleyn's sister-in-law, her brother's wife, appears to be quite a spiteful woman, and she, unbidden, just dumps all this out on Thomas Cromwell. And then Mark Smeaton, the musician, just makes a confession to Thomas Cromwell that Thomas Cromwell did not ask for. So it seems like that's a pretty big coincidence that those were the four men that Thomas Cromwell was carefully planning to get his revenge on. Anyways, apologies for that. I'm restarting the video. My phone, I don't know what's wrong with it. An automatic update came up and it stopped the video. So I'll try and put these together, edit it into one video. But apologies for that abrupt cut there. Anyways, what I wanted to say is I think what's most likely going on is I'm missing something, because this book has been so widely praised by so many people. I would have to imagine that the fault must be with me, right? Or I don't know what's going on. Help me out here with this if you can. But yeah, whether this is Thomas Cromwell's revenge plot to get revenge on the men who mocked Thomas Wolsey, or whether this is a genuine treasonous, adulterous affair, or several affairs that he actually does uncover, either way, it's a much more generous view of Thomas Cromwell than Thomas Cromwell seems to appear on Wikipedia. He appears to be much more noble in the pages of this book than he does in the historical record. Now, I think Steve Donoghue, and I hope I'm conveying his opinion correctly here, Steve Donoghue thinks that Hilary Mantel is playing with the historical record. So Hilary Mantel knows that the historical sources show Thomas Cromwell to be a bloodthirsty thug, sadistic thug, but just to try and pull it off, just to play with it, she makes him into a social justice warrior, somebody who is noble and concerned with the truth and the plight of England. Yeah. I mean, one of the interesting things in here is in this book, Thomas Cromwell has like a public works project, like he wants to institute like a kind of welfare for the poor, or right to work for the poor, which actually doesn't work because he and the king can't get it through Parliament. But it shows him as like a very advanced and progressive thinker. Now, I did just a little bit of research on this, and I didn't do too much research on this because, because I don't have time. This book reviewing thing I do is not my full-time job. I've got 3 jobs and 2 kids, so I try and limit the rabbit holes I go down. That maybe I'm lazy. I don't know. Both explanations can be correct. But anyways, I did just a little bit of research on it, a couple Google searches, going through Wikipedia, and there was some sort of poor law that I guess was floated during this time, which was somewhat attached to Thomas Cromwell. So Hilary Mantel and Steve Donoghue would know the historical record better than I do, but I guess it doesn't seem like it's entirely out of thin air. There is some sort of historical basis for this. I don't know. You can do your own research, or if you know anything, as always, feel free to educate me in the comments. I always appreciate that when people add to my knowledge. So it's a view of history which is taking this horrific end to Anne Boleyn and the 5 men who were executed along with her, and retelling it in a different way, in a way that doesn't maybe directly contradict any of the historical record, but would be unlikely. And this is from the author's note in the back. She says, First of all, she talks about how there's a lot of contradictory evidence there, so it's difficult to sort through this. And yeah, just looking at Wikipedia, you do get that impression. I mean, just a question of, was Mark Smeaton tortured? If so, by whom and how? There's like 3 or 4 different accounts on Wikipedia of what may have happened. So, I guess the takeaway is he was probably tortured, but we don't have any eyewitnesses, reliable eyewitnesses, about what actually happened and who did it. So it's possible to invent the version that Hilary Mantel gives in this book, which is that Mark Smeaton was not tortured. He was just so intimidated by the idea of torture that he spilled his guts completely, and thus making Thomas Cromwell look like not such a horrible guy. So after going through that, she says, in this book, I tried to show how a few crucial weeks might have looked from Thomas Cromwell's point of view. Sorry about the drilling. I'm gonna try and get through this anyways. I am not claiming authority for my version. I am making the reader a proposal, an offer. And I guess that's what a historical novelist does, right? They look at the historical record and then they create the kind of narrative that they want to create within the confines of what the hard and fast facts are in that situation. So yeah, I think that's most of what I want to say about this book, or at least that's all I can think of at the moment. I always think of like 10 things I forgot to say once I turn the camera off. But I think on the main, I don't really have all that much to say about this, which I didn't really say about Wolf Hall. There's some interesting, juicy historical drama in here, but it's not paced the way that you would expect it to be paced if you were only interested in the juicy tragedy of it and the gory bits of it. Instead, what you have, as with Wolf Hall, is a very slowly paced book which is heavy on descriptions and literary descriptions of things, but which is much easier to read than Wolf Hall. And according to Steve Donoghue, because this was the second novel and Hilary Mantel had relaxed a little bit, as he put it. Whatever the reason, I definitely agree that this was a much easier read. I have to admit my limitations. I'm not that literary. I tend to like novels which are more narrative focused and less literary. And I tend to like historical novels in that vein as well. But I found this completely readable. I mean, I think part of the pull in those early chapters, because I did read through this at a relatively fast rate for me. I'm usually a very slow reader. But I finished this off in about 3 weeks. That's good for me. I think part of the thing is that the pull of those early chapters is you're just kind of waiting to get to the good stuff. There's some foreshadowing, but you just know that tragedy is going to come to a lot of these characters. When you do get to it at the end, I found it a little bit anticlimactic, maybe, and again, it was. The book was more maybe introspective and less about the gory details, but it was entirely readable. So I'd give it a recommend for people who are like me. And if you're not like me, if you're somebody who's a little bit more highbrow, well then there are plenty of other people who just loved this book. And check out Steve Donoghue's videos. I'll link to them in my description down below.